Our speaker today is Don Corrigan. He has served for more than 25 years as a professor of journalism at Webster University. He has a Bachelor of Arts from Knox College and an MA in journalism from Mizzou. Don received numerous awards for teaching and scholarly excellence. He has twice been selected as the State College Newspaper Advisor of the Year in Missouri and was presented the National College Newspaper Advisor of the Year Award. The college paper he advises, the Webster University Journal, won Best in State among all college and university newspapers in Missouri. In addition to his work in academia, Don is editor and co-publisher of two suburban weeklies, the Webster Kirkwood Times and South County Times. He has received a Gannett Foundation Writing Award for environmental reporting. He has reported for his newspaper group from Russia, Bosnia, Northern Ireland, and Vietnam. He is contributing writer to St. Louis Magazine and is a frequent writer for the St. Louis Journalism Review, where he has served on that publication's editorial board for more than 25 years. And there's more. He's published several books, including The Public Journalism Movement in America, Evangelists in the Newsroom, and has appeared in favorite columns from a hometown newspaper, a book by Times Publications. In Retta Blaney's book, with a foreword by Walter Cronkite, entitled Journalism, Stories from the Trenches, he contributed a chapter on what it was like to be the first male reporting for a women's lifestyle section on a daily newspaper. His account is both hilarious and disturbing because it reveals the second-place status women have endured at newspapers, even in recent times. I only mention that because of all the women we have in the crowd here. He's already endeared. Last year, he received the Quest Award for Communication from the Missouri Federation of Press Women. His latest book is called Show Me Natural Wonders, a meditation on selected nature sites in the Missouri area. Please give a warm Jefferson County welcome to Don Corrigan.
Well, thank you for that introduction, President Watts, and it's really a privilege to come down and talk to you about a book that's, I'm not really an expert on this area. I'm sort of a dilettante and a dabbler when it comes to nature, but I think that's okay, and I think that's one of the things that this book's about, is to try to tell people that you don't have to be an expert on geology or the history of areas. You can just go out and enjoy them. And my book's a little bit different than most guides because it's less about the amenities at each site, and it's more a reflection how to go to a site and think about different places. So there are the kind of detail stuff that you need at the back of the book, map directions and that sort of thing. But basically it's just taking a look at a nature site and thinking about what went on here and pondering different aspects of the area. So I'll get into that in a second. I also wanted to do something a little more rustic, so instead of having photos of the different sites that I go to, I had an art professor from Merrimack Community College, Ed Theis, do the pencil sketches for the book. So that's a little bit different aspect that gives it sort of a quaint feel, I believe. The show that I do today is kind of a sampler. It's kind of like the Cracker Barrel sampler. How many of you have that Cracker Barrel sampler? I'm trying to save it because I was up earlier this week. I ate at the Cracker Barrel at Barnhart and then the one down by Crystal City, and they're getting rid of the sampler. The corporation's trying to try a new menu. Fight for the sampler, would you? I don't want to lose that sampler. So this is my sampler. So it takes about 5 sketches from each area that I cover in the book. So I do bluffs, springs and streams, caves, and just special places. And I also I've tailored a number of other books. Another number of other presentations. I have the Tree Hugger presentation to talk about how we need to protect these sites, how important they are. I think everybody in here probably knows how important these sites are and is probably familiar with them. So rather than do that more environmental talk, I'm going to talk more about just the sites and what you experience when you go to these sites. So, anybody familiar with this particular site? If you've gone here a couple of times, to me, this kind of thing, this kind of image sort of is an imprint that you remember. Katy Trails. I heard Katy Trail. Yeah. This is the Katy Trail near Rocheport. And that's a great place if you got to travel between St. Louis and Kansas City. I always throw my bike in the back of the car and stop in historic Rocheport. Rocheport has a lot of history. It was a political convention center. It was burned down in the Civil War. Now it's starting to come back as a great bed and breakfast area, and it's a great place to hop on the Katy Trail. So I start with that. I'm sort of partial to bluffs because I started climbing bluffs when I was a kid on the Illinois side of the river. And so I cheat in this book. This is Illinois, although it's called the Missouri Region's Natural Wonders. I had to throw a few Illinois sites. And this is Fultz. Anybody been to Fultz Nature Preserve on the other side of the river? Well, Fultz is a great place to stop to if you decide to go to St. Genevieve and take the ferry across to Modoc and then head up north on Highway 3. You'll run into it. It's also got a great floodplain area below it full of snakes in the spring. And in doing the research for this book, Charlie Hessel at the St. Louis Zoo said that in his early days at the zoo, this is what he always climbed to go find rattlesnakes. So I haven't seen as many up there since those. I think he pretty much got rid of most of them, so feels safe to climb. Another bluff area. How many have been to Hughes Mountain before? So there's always at least a couple. But this is a less well-known site. I call it Missouri's answer to Stonehenge, and that's because of the volcanic rock formations in the area. And they sort of are like pillars, but they busted off so they're like blocks. Kind of reminds me, this summer I was at Giant's Causeway in Ireland, and it kind of reminds me of the same formations there. If anybody's been there, they're sort of like blocks of volcanic rock. Why I call it Stonehenge is because I think the teenagers go up there and they create their own little sacrificial altars, and I don't know what they sacrifice. We won't get into that. But so I think it's a great place because you never know what you're going to find up there, what people have built and left behind. This is a new park. It's a St. Charles County park, and it's like Lewis and Clark Trail Bluffs. And when you do bluffs, you're always on the Mississippi or the Merrimack or the Illinois or the Missouri. And when you're along the Missouri, you can't fail to appreciate the stories about Lewis and Clark. And what I talk about is in the reflection on this piece is just how dangerous it was for Lewis and Clark, and they almost lost their first explorer on this because they sent him up the bluff to see what was ahead, and he fell 75 feet and wasn't moving too well till they finally got to Boonville some months later. The other thing I like to talk about with this bluff area is what's across the way when you're looking east. What is that area there? That's the Chesterfield Valley. And we all know, or many of us probably remember the images when that was underwater back in '93. And now they've got over $3 billion of commercial development in that area. And they say it's safe now because they have a 500-year levee. How many of you believe that 500-year levee is going to hold that flood off for another 495 years? So I talk a little bit about that as well. This is closer to home. It's just south of here down 55, and that is Trail of Tears State Park. And it's a great bluff area to spend a weekend, and they have a little museum down there to remember the forced march of the Cherokee across the country for resettlement in the Oklahoma area. The thing that I ask in this is when you go up to that bluff, enjoy the weather and enjoy the view, but think about what happened here in 1838 when the Cherokee in late December were stuck below and they had to figure out a way to get them across. And they'd already suffered a lot because a lot of the white settlers, when they camped on their land on this forced march, they would take their blankets and their horses and say, "We need rent from you for staying here." And then they get to hear and they get a typical St. Louis area kind of storm: rain, sleet, snow, changing back to sleet, and they have to somehow get across the ice floes. And a lot of them perished on the Illinois side. So I ask people, if you go up there, enjoy it, but think a little bit about the history that happened here. Ed Theis got sort of tired, put out with my love of bluffs. So when we did Pere Marquette, he wanted to do the Eagles because, of course, that's prime eagle watching area. How many of you have done some eagle watching and gone up for those tours? And this is one of the things I do with this book is try to be a little more upbeat about nature and the environment and tell positive stories. And this, of course, is one of the more positive stories we have to tell in the area, because in the 60s, we were down to less than 50 eagles' nests because of pesticides and DDT. And because those issues were addressed, the latest census was about 2,000 eagles' nests in the Missouri and Illinois and Mississippi River valleys. So they've really come back, and they were just taken off the endangered species list this year. But it's still a felony to shoot them. And for some reason, felonies get committed every year. And it's hard to understand. But it is, other than that, a positive story about nature and getting back these sort of precious aspects of our natural environment. This is a transition phase. It's a river and a bluff. This is the wreck of the Arabia near Park Promontory Bluffs, near Park College, now Park University. How many of you have seen this steamboat? Where'd you see it? Where? Kansas City, right. Kansas City, on their riverfront, they have a great museum to this. It's a fascinating story about how the people were rescued. What did they leave behind when they, there's one fatality, a Missouri mule, and they have that mule in the museum. Of course, it's just a skeleton now, but I love the way they have the harness on it, and they still have it tied to the rail. They were able to retrieve so much of that boat because it went down so quickly. I like the story about the passengers who they got whatever they could take off. The little luggage they were able to save, they had to leave at the bottom of the bluff because it was too much to carry up. And then when they came back the next day for it, it had all been looted. It was all gone. So it makes me feel a little bit better about our own times. This has been going on for a while. Sam Baker State Park, and there are quite a few bluffs for the kids to dive off. We always tell them not to dive off, but they do it anyway. And this inspired me to go back. We used to have a newspaper columnist from Arkansas named Grady Jim Robinson at the weekly newspaper I'm involved in, the Webster Kirkwood Times. And he did a column. He liked to write about Arkansas all the time. And he made fun of Arkansas. Missourians love that. And he was actually had a pretty good comedy shtick going on. Then he went to Washington, D.C., and this was before the Clintons. And he tried it out on the East Coast, and nobody knew where Arkansas was. They had no idea what he was talking about. But I throw this in here because it reminded me of a story, a little column that he wrote. It was like 2.5 pages long, and I'll tell you about the column itself, the content. But he made the most money on this that I've ever seen a freelancer make. Most freelancers are lucky if they get $35, $50 for a 2.5-page story. He went to Reader's Digest with it first. They said, no, you got to get it published somewhere else because we just take reprints from other magazines. So he went to Sports Illustrated. It's a little 2.5-page story. They liked it, and this was the beginning of him writing for them quite a bit. They gave him $3,000 for it. Then Reader's Digest said, yeah, we'll take it, $6,000. Then a couple trade magazines in Arkansas took it. He's up to $10,000. And then Hollywood decides it's a great prototype for a pilot for a comedy series about rural life in Arkansas, and they give him $10,000. So $20,000 for a little 2.5. I want to know how he did that. But the story was that he was trying to compete with the bully in his county in Arkansas. And the bully in the county always won the girls in the summer because of the beautiful swan dive that he did. Well, Grady Jim met with his friends, and his dive was the dive off the bluff, do a double backflip, catch a Snickers in midair, and eat it before you hit the water dive. So when I went down there, I said, I got to write about Grady Jim when we talk about this area. I love this guy. This is one of the early environmentalists and fighters in the area. His name is Taylor, and he lives up in Castlewood. And this is Vilander or Vilander Bluffs, depending on whether you live in Missouri or Missouri. And he's a poler. He doesn't believe in using the oar. You know, he poles this canoe all over the place. And back in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s, they started to do one of the first Clean Streams Act to stop cattle and livestock from going into the rivers and erosion problems and clear cutting. And he's got a whole scrapbook of his fight for this, which I just think is phenomenal because it's so Missouri. He went to southern Missouri and they chased him off. You know, he'd go to the town hall to try to get him to vote for this, and they'd say, "You're nothing but a communist, you know, trying to tell us what to do with our land," you know. And they literally chased him out of the county with shotguns. And then one night they blew up his car in his driveway in Castlewood, but it didn't deter him. And although they were not successful with that battle, they went on for another day. He and his group fought the Merrimack Dam project and helped defeat that when they tried to do sort of a Lake of the Ozarks project on this side of the state. So some of you, he may be a hero, others might not be so happy with him. This is kind of an icon in the state, Alley Springs and the old mill at Alley Springs. When I was in college, I never went back there and looked at it. You know, we always wanted to get on the river right away, the Jacks Fork or the Current. How many of you have canoed the Jacks Fork or Current? I figured there'd be a lot of floaters in here. But we never, you know, we brought our 6 hot dogs and our 10 cases of beer and loaded up the canoes and got on the water as soon as we could. And it was only in later years that I realized there was this mill back here and there's this beautiful spring. And it's really one of the prettiest springs, I think, in the Missouri area. So if you go canoeing, do not fail to take some time to go back and look at the old mill in the spring. This is just down the river from there on the Jacks Fork. It's a stop on the way between Alley Springs and 2 rivers where the Jacks Fork comes into the Current, and it's a bluff area with a cave on top. And this is one of the things that's great about Missouri. You sort of start a tradition, and we have this tradition in my family where every September we go down there with a bunch of teenagers. Only this year I brought them up there, and they climbed all the way to the top, and I was thinking, oh, this is not good. If they fall, it's going to be about this nature writer who lured these kids up there. I'm going to have to jump, too. But I try to do something a little more literary with this, and that is one of Ed Theis's heroes is the Missouri artist Thomas Hart Benton, and I think this is a great reflective piece, and you'll see that he modeled this on one of Benton's paintings. Benton, of course, thought he was too good for Missouri when he was younger, and he went off to Chicago, and then he went to New York, and then Paris, and then he found his way back here because he said you can't find landscapes like you have in Missouri. And he did some of his best work, I think, in those later years. Of course, I also like the murals that he has in the state capitol in Jefferson City, and he manages to get some of Missouri's nature in there as well. I remember the late Bud Barnes, who was the representative in my area, Kirkwood, and that used to be the Smokers Lounge in the state capitol where all these beautiful murals were by Thomas Hart Benton, and he finally fought to preserve that room and get the smokers out of there. How many of you have seen the Thomas Hart Bentons in the state capitol? If you haven't been there, you've got to go up there because he really tells the story of Missouri with those murals. This one might be another one that folks in this area are familiar with. This is between Fredericton and Farmington. Some of the locals call it Pink Rocks. It's on the Castor River, so some folks call it the Castor River Shut-ins. It's also now Amadon State Conservation Area. How many are familiar with this place? Yeah, it's an area that was private property for a long time, and when I started going there and camping, you could do just about whatever you wanted, and so we'd camp out there all night, and I asked Ed to do a piece showing a lunar eclipse because we were there one night, not knowing that this was going to happen. And it's one of those things that happens in your lifetime and you remember it and it's never going to happen again. And it was just a beautiful night. Then when the moon disappeared, the insects stopped and you saw the shooting stars and there was a lightning storm in the distance. Unfortunately, more people started discovering it after my college years, and by the time you got into the later 80s, there were folks going in there with their ATVs and stirring things up and lots of beer cans. And I wrote that the Conservation Department finally put their foot down and acquired the land because it was getting so messed up. But I was up in Rocheport doing this talk a few weeks ago, and the conservation agent there says, well, that's not really the way it happened. He goes, of course we wanted that to stop. He goes, but the real story is I'm the one that got that property and got Mrs. Amadon to sell it to us. I said, well, what's the story behind it? He goes, well, there was a bunch of naked hippies swimming in there all the time. He goes, she wouldn't believe it, so I brought her daughter out there and showed her. Sure enough, she was appalled by that, and she sold it the next week. And I said, I don't remember any hippies when I was there, This is Rocky Falls. It's in that area of two rivers where the Jacks Fork and the Current meet. And Rocky Falls is a cascade sort of area where you have falls that descend in layers. And in the profile and review of the book that Tom Eulenbrog of the Post did a few weeks ago, he talked about this as his favorite area of fall waterfalls and cascades. The trouble with Missouri's cascades is that you have to go at the right time in the spring because they're just a trickle the rest of the time. And when I dragged my kids to some of these places for the book, they'd be real upset with me because I'd show them this great picture of the falls, and they'd come there and it'd be, like the Minnesota Falls, it'd be a little trickle, and they'd go. Of course, it was their fault because they insisted on hiking in flip-flops, and if you do that, you're not going to be happy about walking 3 miles into. This one, the couple times that I was there were a tremendous number of the water witches, dragonflies. And there's a lot of superstition about dragonflies, some positive and some negative. So I use my experience at Rocky Falls to talk about dragonflies and why they like some of these Missouri sites like Rocky Falls. Johnson shut-ins. This used to be a crisis area of the state. Karen Foss told us 6 weeks ago that that's all taken care of now, so we don't really need to talk much about Johnson shut-ins. The Johnson shut-ins, I think I packed up my kids numerous times to go down there, and you warn them about being careful, and it's just, forget it. You just finally end up climbing up a rock like a big baboon and watch your brood and hope they don't get hurt, But this is a good example of where we need to be more insistent on preserving the nature sites in our area. And I think that few people realize what a calamity we really escaped when that dam broke in December, because had it broken in the summer, there would have undoubtedly been many fatalities, and I just don't think that that's still impressed enough on people. And I also think it's going to be years before this comes back to what it was. Johnson shut-ins, though, I think is another one of those areas that we need to put more energy into to keep it safe. Some of the stories that came out of there when I was doing research, I asked, well, what happened to that ranger? That story made the Reader's Digest. I don't know if anybody read it, but what happened to that family? How that house went off that foundation and that family survived, that's absolutely amazing. And I asked, well, where is he now? And they go, well, he's transferred to Bennett Springs, and he has a cabin way up on a hill. This is closer to home for me. This is Creve Coeur Lake area. It's neat now because they, some people would say it's not so neat because they did the Page Avenue extension. But one of the things the highway department was smart about is when they pushed for that extension, they gave the nature folks a trail on the bridge so that they could get to the Katy Trail. So it's a great place to go and start and get to the Katy Trail to go to St. Charles or to go to Defiance. I also like this area because there's so much activity on the trails around the lake. You got the hikers, the bikers, the inline skaters. Another great story is the revival of the St. Louis Rowing Club, which used to be on the Mississippi back in the early teens of the 1910, 1920, 1930. Then they disbanded for a time, and now they're back, and they're back at Creve Coeur Lake. So it's fun to go out there and see the scullers. And in fact, a lot of St. Louis kids are getting scholarships at prestigious colleges all over the country because they join the St. Louis Rowing Club and really develop an expertise in that area. This is switching to caves. I didn't really want to do caves. Caves aren't my thing, but the cavers insisted on it. I have friends at the Merrimack Grotto Club that meets at Powder Valley Nature Center in Kirkwood Sunset Hills, and so they said, you've got to do caves. You've got to do the wilderness underground, as they call it. So I eased into this part of the book by taking some smaller sites, like Graham Cave is really more of a grotto. And grottos are interesting just because of the Native American history, because they were used a lot for rituals and rites at the end of the fall season, celebrate the harvest. And I like this story because when I was at camp in the Shawnee National Forest in southern Illinois, they always used to talk about this huge grotto where the Indians, the Shawnee Indians got a little bit too excited about their celebration, built a huge fire, and the grotto cracked and caved down on them and killed them all. And one of the scouts came back and found them like that. So I kind of do a piece about how when you're doing your celebration of the fall harvest, be a little careful how much you party. For folks who go to Mizzou or went to Mizzou, they probably recognize some of these natural sites. Rockbridge is just south, and it's another great place to go. It's a collapsed cavern. What's great about this is that you don't have to get muddy. They have wooden trails through. And what cave is further down, which is probably a more impressive cave? Some Mizzou grads that went into this park. Anybody know? Devil's Icebox. How many been to Devil's Icebox before? Yeah, I see some heads shaking. Devil's Icebox is actually about 28 miles long, and it has a great and kind of frightening history with the number of fatalities they've had with people venturing in there and not coming out. It's one of the places where the state rescue people do their cave rescue practices. Everything in the state's named for the devil. Why is that? This is supposed to be a religious state, and we have Devil's Elbow, Devil's Icebox, Devil's Backbone. Why is that? So that's why I threw this in here, Ozark Cave. It's a great cave, but it's also one where they have the angel shower. So I threw that in so that it's an interesting feature of this cave, and it runs year-round, even in drought. So it's a good sort of antidote to all these devils that we have in Missouri. This is a little bit closer to home for us. This is at Merrimack State Park, Fisher Cave. What I found interesting about this cave is running into some cavers who are repairing stalactites and stalagmites. And there's a fellow who belongs to their group who works at 3M Adhesives in Springfield. He developed a special glue to put these things back together again. So they actually go in and try to hunt and match these things up. That's one of the sad legacies, I think, of Missouri, is that back in the early 1900s, a lot of people used to party in these places, and they'd all take one of these home as a souvenir, a stalagmite or stalactite. And not a good idea because they don't last out in sunlight anyway. They sort of dwindle to powder. Everyone knows this cave, I would think, Onondaga. And those are the famous 500 million year old lily pads. One of the things you find about caving in Missouri is there's a lot of commercialism and hokiness for show caves. And in this case, I find it amusing that it's named for Onondaga, but there's no Onondaga tribe anywhere close. They're all in New York, so they're hundreds of miles away. So why did they name it Onondaga? They had a naming contest, and they liked Onondaga because it was good for marketing, because it's something you remember. Onondaga, Onondaga, Onondaga. Sort of like that thing where you hammer your head. You just remember it. And then Jesse James. I think the Jesse James movie just came out. And of course, we had the real Jesse James at the caverns here at Merrimack Caverns. Actually, one of the things that got me writing on this is there was an old Globe Democrat photographer who lived in Kirkwood, and he was convinced that Lester Dill did discover the true Jesse James and had him housed there for a number of years. I think the DNA is kind of like pulled the rug out from under that, but it's a great story, and so I spend some time talking about, in this part of the book, reflecting on the Jesse James legend in the caves. Actually, I've talked to a lot of expert cavers. They say most outlaws would not go into caves because there aren't too many escape routes in caves. This is transitioning to the last part of the book, which is just special places. And Big Oak Tree State Park in the Boot Heel area of the state, I think, is interesting because you drive down there and all you see is soybeans and corn and drainage canals. And actually, the whole state had this giant, that whole part of the state had this giant forest. And this is kind of an interesting piece because there was just this one island of oak trees left, and the school kids collected nickels and dimes, some of them from nearby East Prairie, to buy this and save this so we could see what the Boot Heel used to look like. Knob Noster State Park is not particularly impressive, except that it's a great place to stop on your way back from Kansas City back to this area. And I think it's kind of spooky in the late fall or early winter because they're reforesting it, and here's all these young trees, and when you get all this breeze going, it's sort of like the Blair Witch Hunt. You think they're going to grab you and take you away. So this is another kind of scary place in a different way. This is Allred Lake Natural Area, and there are a lot of bowfish and gar and salamanders that date back hundreds of millions of years. I think it's sort of primordial, like the primordial swamp, so I try not to get into the evolution or creation debate, but I do say if you believe in evolution, you should take a trip down there and see some of your ancestors while you're there. So I threw some sites in from Kansas City. I think Kansas City is a little further behind than the St. Louis area in the eastern half of the state when it comes to trails and preservation. But if you go past Arrowhead Stadium and go into the city, you'll pass over the Blue River, and it looks like a drainage dump. But this is, again, one of the good stories about what's happening in Missouri, because they have the Blue River Rescue folks who are really restoring it, and they're also restoring glades. I go to these sites a lot of times when I'm doing newspaper conventions, journalism conventions, and take some time out. And I remember spending an afternoon here in November and stretching out on one of these huge rocks, which was warmed by the sun. It's an interesting hike in there because the sun goes down early because there's a landfill mountain on the west side of it. But if you overlook that, it's kind of a nice area to go take a look at. This is one thing that people should be familiar with from this area. This is, of course, where Times Beach used to be. How many people know how Times Beach got its name? Yeah, how did that happen? Yeah, Times Beach was a newspaper promotion. That's why I remember it. The old St. Louis Times had a circulation contest, and you bought a subscription, and if you won, you got beach property at wonderful Times Beach. Got to be known as Times Beach. Of course, that property values went down back in the 80s, so after Russell Bliss went and coated it with dioxin-contaminated oil. I think it's great the way it's been brought back. There's a lot of debate about how dangerous dioxin really is, but I can't believe how the wildlife has come back. There's so many deer there. A lot of them have 3 antlers, but nevertheless, it's a wonderful place to go. And there's the Route 66 State Park nearby as well. Finally, a couple more slides left. I know you guys got places you got to get to. You got to go to your own nature site after this and experience. But this is close to home again for me, and it shows how people are starting to appreciate saving nature. The Gemp family, they were offered millions of dollars for this property, which is sort of in the middle of Crestwood and Sunset Hills. And one of the Gemp sisters said, no, I'm not selling it. I'm naming it after Claire. This is our old dairy farm. I'm going to will it to the state. And the state and Sunset Hills and the Lindbergh School District now manage it. So So it's a great sort of story about how you should preserve little islands of nature even in urban areas, so you have sort of a refuge to go to. And finally, if you can't drive down to the primordial swamp, or you can't drive to some of these more remote places, then bring nature to you. So I end the book talking about how you can bring nature to your own backyard by creating butterfly gardens. And you can see that in St. Louis, you know. And Missouri's famous for a lot of the flyways for butterflies, and the Merrimack is one of those flyways, a great place to stop. So that's why I end the book with the story about go ahead and do that. And there are a lot of resources to help you. And I was surprised to learn how many chapters of the North American Butterfly Association there are in Missouri, and their folks will volunteer their time to help you to learn how to put one of these in your backyard. Well, I appreciate your patience with this today. Thanks so much for coming out, and I've enjoyed my time here. Thank you.